Welcome back to the Inglet Hit. Today we'll focus on Act 3, Scene 2, in which Macbeth and Lady Macbeth discuss the way forward. It would be helpful to have the scene in front of you as we go through some of the key ideas. You might even want to read it beforehand so that you're familiar with the plot. We'll explore three things. Has the balance of power tilted in Macbeth's favour? Does Macbeth deceive his wife? And to what extent is the murder of Banquo a shared endeavour? Firstly then, is the relationship between Macbeth and his wife fractured? Has the murder of Duncan torn apart that seemingly inextricable bond of love and ambition? You could argue that while there is undeniably a shift in power, Macbeth still loves his wife. He calls her dearest Chuck and dear wife after all. But is this a facade, like so much of what Macbeth and Lady Macbeth say in this play? Is this actually condescending language in which Macbeth finally decides to seize control of the situation and take matters into his own hands? Clearly, Macbeth takes less notice of his wife's comments in this scene. Her suggestions are met with commands in reply, or else he completely ignores her. He negates her assertion that what's done is done with the metaphor, "We have scorched the snake, not killed it." Lady Macbeth's seemingly confident line, "Be bright and jovial," is met with a command in reply, one that hints at his desired course of action. "Let your remembrance apply to Banquo." He asks her to specifically present him eminence, and she appears to cotton on when she says, "You must leave this." Interestingly, Shakespeare chooses to frame the command with a modal verb, must, rather than an imperative. Earlier in the play, she tells him to leave all the rest to me. Does this mark a development in her sway over him? Is she losing control? Well, in response, he reiterates the problem of Banquo and Fleance. Her attempts to reassure him go unnoticed, and instead he recognises that he can alleviate the threat. There's comfort yet, they are assailable. Perhaps most importantly, she asks him what's to be done. In Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth, under the spell of his wife's already thought-out plan, asks if we should fail, to which she responds with utter derision, "We fail!" Here, Macbeth speaks contemptuously instead. In modern terms, he says, "Don't you worry about it, you'll like it when it's done, leave it to me." This scene marks a profound shift in the power play within this relationship. Loving? Maybe. But certainly the expected gender norms of their time have been re-established, and Macbeth has resumed his role as the masculine figure, at least in part. Remember, he is still racked by insecurity. In Act 3, Scene 4, he is unhinged and terrified by the ghost of Banquo. "Never shake thy gory locks at me!" In fact, Lady Macbeth deals with this in a remarkably familiar way, mockery. This is perhaps a remnant of long-lost power she no longer possesses. Lady Macbeth reverts to her previous demeanour, her scornful attitude towards her husband when she asks, "Are you a man?" But maybe she is desperate to conceal the deed of dreadful note. She knows it has been committed, and she temporarily resumes her role as deceiver, as the innocent flower of Act 1, Scene 6. So secondly, does Macbeth deceive his wife? Perhaps, though, she deceives herself in a way. She is under the impression that he keeps alone, of sorriest fancies your companion's making. She believes he is entrenched in the guilt of killing Duncan when, in reality, he has just coerced some murderers in the previous scene, persuading them that Banquo was your enemy and concluding with a degree of confidence that it is concluded. Banquo, thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight. This is not a man consumed by guilt, as Lady Macbeth assumes. Rather, he is clear on his aims and is putting them into action with terrifying self-assurance. But they are at least agreed on one thing. It is better to be dead than to feel what they are feeling now, whatever that is. Whether they are united in their worries about the instability of their power or not is up to you. But clearly they are both struggling with the situation. She says, safer to be that which we destroy, and he complements this with, better be with the dead. But are they on the same wavelength? It seems they might both believe this is true for different reasons. Lady Macbeth throughout this scene appears ignorant of Macbeth's intention to kill Banquo. Even at the end, when he has strongly hinted at his next murder, she asks, what's to be done? Is this the coy, faux ignorance of a woman who realises her husband is going to lengths she never thought possible and wishes to separate herself from what is about to go down? Or is she genuinely unaware? Macbeth certainly does not speak forthrightly about the matter and makes it clear that her knowledge of it is of little consequence. He is absorbed in evil, similarly in some respects to her own collusion with the supernatural in Act 1, when she says, "Come, you spirits." In fact, notice the comparison here between these two scenes. They both resolve to murder somebody, and they speak in almost identical ways. Is this an indication that Macbeth has wrested power back from his wife, that he is concocting plans without her knowledge in the exact same way as she did following receipt of the letter from her husband? Look at it. Lady Macbeth, come thick night and pow thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. And Macbeth, scenes later, acts later, come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day. Thirdly then, is Lady Macbeth complicit in the murder of Banquo? Throughout the play, the question of agency, who acts and do they act freely, is one that has underpinned our reading of the different characters. Malcolm's verdict in Act 5, Scene 7 is that she, Lady Macbeth, is a fiend-like queen. It is her role as a temptress, her seductive manipulation of Macbeth, her Eve-esque sway over her husband, that leads to the bloody regicide of Duncan. That, of course, is a disputable interpretation. But the original murder aside, is the brutal killing of Banquo a shared endeavour, or does Macbeth act alone? Arguably, the play is about how ambition-inspired treason leads to tyranny, disrupts the God-given natural order. So, with the wife out of the picture, is this the beginning of his dictatorial decline? The consequence of a mind full of scorpions, plagued by insecurities and fear for his throne? We have scorched the snake, not killed it, Macbeth says towards the beginning of Act 3, Scene 2. Lady Macbeth undoubtedly recognises the threat of Banquo. She remembers the witch's prophecy, "Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none." He is on her mind when she asks the servant, "Is Banquo gone from court?" It's not coincidental, I don't think, that she immediately asks for the king to be fetched. While she presents a front of guiltless confidence, it appears that she too worries about the security of their kingship. Her short soliloquy before Macbeth arrives is incredibly revealing. "Naught's had, all spent, where our desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy." Just look at the antithesis in that first line. They have secured nothing with all the effort they have gone to. This echoes of Macbeth's line in the previous scene, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown." Both parties in this relationship are concerned for their grip on power, but it seems there is a disconnect in terms of how they view the way forward. While before, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth share the secret of this deed, the regicide of Duncan, now they keep secrets from one another. Lady Macbeth conceals her concerns from her husband when she proclaims that what's done is done. In fact, she insists that you must leave this, despite having anxieties of her own about Banquo. But Lady Macbeth's views on the matter are afforded little weight in Macbeth's decision. He leaves her out of the loop. Be innocent of the knowledge, he commands. He considers it safer to press on alone. This is not a shared endeavour, is it? But surely Lady Macbeth can infer what her husband intends to do. The euphemistic language of a deed of dreadful note is hardly ambiguous in its meaning. Even the consonants, that repeated d, cries of impending doom. In fact, They refer to the killing of Duncan as the deed 8 times in the first half of the play. Just look at Macbeth's language here. Ere the bat hath flown his cloistered flight, ere to the black Hecate's summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums hath rung night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note. These aren't the words of a man deciding what to buy Banquo for Christmas, are they? Unless it's an axe in his back or a noose of piano wire around his neck. Look at the dark, demonic language. It is almost as though he channels the incantations of the witches themselves. Arguably, though, Lady Macbeth has little choice but to comply on this occasion. Her husband has determined his own course of action now, and his wife's advice falls on deaf ears. Perhaps this is part of the reason for her breakdown later in the play. No longer is he her dearest partner of greatness. The guilt, maybe, was manageable for her, while she enjoyed uninhibited access to Macbeth's plans, while she could even influence his decisions. But now that he has rejected her suggestions, she is left to mull over the deed, to internalise emotions she rebuked Macbeth for displaying outwardly after the murder of Duncan, and indeed 2 scenes later at the banquet following Banquo's death. So is this a fractured relationship or not? How and why does Shakespeare present the relationship like this at this stage? Perhaps in order to successfully undermine their treasonous acts in the preceding scenes. He needs to destroy the relationship that put the plan into motion to begin with. Maybe this is the turning point in the play when Macbeth's rise to power eases into his tyrannical decline. The inevitable resolution is the restoration of the monarchy, Malcolm on the throne. Shakespeare could hardly allow a rogue criminal to rule freely. So is this the moment the cracks truly begin to appear? You decide.